We are debating a matter of public importance, and I call the honourable member for Melbourne Ports.
Thank you, Acting Speaker. Today's matter of public importance is very well timed. We've seen today the most compelling evidence that this is a government totally preoccupied with its own survival. This is a government willing to do anything, to say anything to get itself re-elected. As the last speaker is the very proof of, it's willing to slander anybody, attack anybody, override anybody to scrape up some electoral advantage for itself. The Treasurer is accusing senior members of the press gallery who sit up there of being liars. He talked big over a few bottles of red wine, then he had a panic attack and insists that his bragging was off the record. He said he would destroy the Prime Minister, then he lacked the guts to follow through. He denigrated the Prime Minister behind his back, then he denies to his face and to the public that he's doing it. He safely ridicules former Prime Minister Keating from this House, but he doesn't have half of Paul Keating's ticker. If one doubts how the division is consuming the government opposite, one only has to see the performance of the Minister for Ageing on TV this morning. He was asked about the Treasurer and he was effusive. He was asked about the Prime Minister. He made a face, said nothing and walked into the House. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is totally obsessed with preserving his reputation. He's had the chance to bow out gracefully last year, but hubris got the better of him. Now, hubris is followed by nemesis, as it always is. In his desperation, he is lashing out at the states, claiming credit for state initiatives he thinks the voters will like and sticking his nose into areas that he thinks he can find some advantage. Once it was possible to respect the Prime Minister as a born-again economic rationalist, even if we disagreed with his principles, but no longer. Now he's thrown overboard the advice of Mr Henry, the Secretary of the Treasury, principles that he's thrown overboard in pursuit of naked self-interest, political self-interest. Whatever happened to small government, to states' rights, to federalism? Robert Menzies would be horrified to see the rampant centralism, the big government, high taxing, big spending excesses of this government. Their TV advertising is bigger than McDonald's and Coca-Cola combined. Now, none of the strong Liberal premiers of the past, Balti, Askin, Court or Playford, would have tolerated a Liberal Prime Minister behaving in this way. Now we have a government that is so determined to get itself re-elected that it's willing to spend unprecedented amounts of taxpayers' money on thinly disguised political advertising. This year alone we've got $14.5 million promoting private health insurance, $15.8 million promoting so-called simpler superannuation, $12.9 million on something called Skills for the Future, and at least $4.1 million selling the disastrous workplace relations laws. This is a scandalous waste, far outstripping any spending on political advertising by any previous government. Meanwhile, the problems this government has neglected continue to fester. Many people on this side have spoken about housing stress. In my electorate, 53% of all households are in rented accommodation, the fourth highest in any electorate. More than 30% of these households in my electorate are paying more than 30% of their income on rent. Rents in Melbourne have risen by nearly 9% in 2006 and they're still rising. People in St Kilda, in Elwood, in South Melbourne, in Caulfield and Balaclava, many of them young families with children, are being squeezed out of the rental market, but they are shut out of the home buyers market by rising property costs and rising interest rates. The childcare crisis continues to affect many people in my electorate, as it does across the country. One centre in my electorate, childcare fees have risen by 39% over the past year. Of course fees rise because demand is outstripping supply. The government's response is crisis? What crisis? The government legislates to force mothers with young children back to work under its work choices legislation, but does nothing to help them find affordable childcare, which is vital for working families. The other vital issues which are being neglected while this government is preoccupied with its own survival and its own leadership, the rest of the world is moving on to deal with issues of climate change, for instance. But this government is paralysed because the climate sceptics, led by Senator Minchin, are preventing any serious action. The honourable member for Tangi and his flat earth friends have let the cat out of the bag with their dissenting report. Australia is paying a heavy price for this government inertia and political paralysis. We've also seen in an area of education that I know about 10 years of inaction that only measures by the Shadow Education Minister and Kevin Rudd have changed in the last 2 years by putting pressure on this government. We've also seen evidence of this government's preoccupation with its own survival and the shameless manipulation of the electoral system. Recent changes to the Electoral Act will deprive more than 100,000 Australians, mainly first-time voters, of their vote. The Special Minister for State says it's their own fault for not enrolling on time. We say, what's the harm by allowing the traditional 5-day period of grace to enrol? The government hopes by shutting out these young people out of elections it can scrape up some petty advantage. Maybe it will, but it won't be enough to save the Minister for Eden Monero